Hi guys, welcome to another episode of Pointy Not Sharp. Today we're taking a look at the Dutch model of 1895 KNIL bayonet. Now KNIL is an abbreviation, it's a Dutch abbreviation. Translated to English it means Royal Netherlands East Indies Army. And that's the separate army the Dutch had, or colonial force the Dutch had in the East Indies, now Indonesia. So they were separate from the rest of the Dutch military. This bayonet was made to fit the Dutch model of 95 KNIL rifle, and as well as the cavalry carbine and the engineer carbine. And there weren't a terrible lot of them made, and not many of them survive today because they're in Indonesia and they were honestly put through a lot of abuse. So in December of 1896, an initial order of 36,000 was ordered from OEWG, and they were delivered not long after, I believe in the following year or two. And in 1889, a further 5,000 were ordered, and again another 5,000 in 1915. However, in 1915, the order didn't go to OEWG, it was Hembroek, which was the domestic arms producer in the Netherlands. And I've also read that in 1918 there was another order, but I don't know how many were made. So I'm going to assume another 5,000, bring the total up to about 51,000. So I don't know the exact total, but it's between 46 and 51, somewhere in there, most likely. The KNIL operated and thought quite differently to the rest of the Dutch army. So while the Dutch army preferred long arms with long bayonets that are sheathed in a scabbard at the hip, the KNIL preferred to have light and handy rifles. They wanted to have as much weight reduced from them as possible, and they wanted really small handy bayonets like this one here that would be fixed to the rifle at all times. So while on patrol, if they're ambushed, at a moment's notice, they're good to go. Their bayonet is already fixed. They weren't a fan of long rifles in general because while they had colonial soldiers from Europe, they also had native Indonesian soldiers as well, or East Indies soldiers, and they struggled to operate the long rifles as well as the longer bayonets, or the weight all the way at the front. So they preferred something nice and light. And you've got to remember, Indonesia, they're fighting in the jungle, very close quarters. They don't want something long that's going to get caught and tangled on the foliage. So while the Dutch were having the trials into the M95, the KNIL was sort of looking over their shoulder, and eventually they decided to do their own trial. And during their trial, they had two versions of the bayonet. They had the conventional model of 1895 that the Dutch used, and they also trialled a shorter and lighter version. In the end, neither was satisfactory, and they wanted something shorter with a double-sided blade, which is what they adopted here. And those initial 36,000 came with steel scabbards, which I don't have here. Those initial steel scabbards came with a wood interior as well for retaining the blade. Now, those scabbards were a little bit of a disaster because KNIL soldiers carried a lot of equipment, including machetes, which came in their own metal scabbards, and they found that the steel scabbard of the bayonet was clinking against the machete scabbard, as well as the scabbard being a little bit loose and the blade rattling around inside it. And it was unnecessary noise that they felt put their soldiers at risk. So almost immediately they discarded their scabbards and permanently fixed these bayonets to the rifles. So if you look back at the old photos, that's what you'll see. You'll see these bayonets, which are not terribly long, always fixed to the end of the rifles. And that was built into their doctrine. And that lasted for quite some time, a good 15 years. However, in 1911, they went back and they actually did reintroduce scabbards. However, the new ones were leather and not steel. So the steel ones are quite hard to find today. You don't see them very often. There's a couple of collectors online who are got photos of theirs and they're immensely proud of them, and I don't blame them because I'm never going to find a scabbard for this one, I don't think. But the leather scabbards, they had some produced in the Netherlands, so they were the standard style of scabbard that they were already using, and they also had a bunch produced domestically in the East Indies, or now Indonesia, and those ones are a lot rougher. And while they're not terribly common because the leather deteriorated in the tropics, as well as the bayonets themselves, it's very hard to find them in good condition. Not a lot of those leather scabbards have remained. They're all pretty much stuffed now. And in 1912, they introduced their cavalry carbine, and that took a bayonet pretty much identical to what we have here. However, slightly different, so it's not the same bayonet. The crossguard and the handle were slightly different dimensions, so they weren't interchangeable. While they looked the same, you didn't want to mix them up. So to differentiate them, they carved into or stamped into the pommel and the metal scabbard KAL, which was an abbreviation for cavalry. In 1907, there was a further order when they introduced a whole bunch of engineer carbine KNIL bayonets, and those were the same as the cavalry. They weren't interchangeable with the conventional rifles, except I probably should have mentioned this. The cavalry carbine, while it had the steel scabbard, had a brass throat or brass inlay. I don't know exactly what it was, but it was slightly different to the steel scabbard that the rifle used. And the engineer carbine, while it had the same bayonet as the cavalry carbine, it went back to the original steel scabbard. These bayonets saw extensive use throughout the colonial period. They were in near constant use, and they saw very, very hard use as well, which is evident by just the sheer rough condition you always seem to find them in. It's very rare you find one in good condition. And they were used for a very long time as well. They were still used in the Second World War. The Japanese actually took control of them and used them themselves. And you'll see some Japanese bayonets with these blades, where these bayonets are actually converted to fit the Japanese Arisaka rifles, although those are incredibly rare and sell for stupid money when you come across them. Now, there's a whole bunch of poor copies of these as well, and a little bit odd. I don't think that they would actually work. So it appears they're made in Indonesia, and I'm not sure if they're made to sell as fakes, if they're made to try and fit the rifles, if they're used for just as sidearms or ceremonially, I don't know. But there's a whole range of different kinds that you come across. This is one I found on Tokopedia selling in Indonesia today. So they're out there. It should be noted though that these bayonets are very unique because the mortise sits on the bottom of the pommel and the muzzle ring on the other side of the crossguard. So the bayonet lug sits underneath while the muzzle sits above, and the bayonet sort of fits in between the two, which is very unconventional. Usually the bayonet lug sits just underneath the barrel, kind of like this, and the lug will go straight in there and the barrel will be directly above. But there's about a 1 inch gap in between the bayonet lug and the barrel. And the copies you come across don't have that. They have the mortise up the top with the muzzle ring. So there's no way they would fit the rifle. So either they're designed to fit some other kind of rifle and they've been adapted, or they're just completely wrong. I don't know. All that said though, we'll jump into the construction of the blade. This is one of my favourite bayonets, even though it's in absolutely terrible condition. This was actually my birthday present last year, and I'm very happy with it. So as you can see, we've got a dagger style of double-sided, or double-edged blade with no fuller. It's got a really nice point on it. It's very thin. Now, it does have a little bit of give in it, but I don't want to bend it. I'm worried it could be brittle and I don't want to snap it or bend it or anything like that. I haven't seen any examples that are broken, but I wouldn't be surprised if quite a few did break. They just seem a bit, I don't know, flimsy and fragile to me. And they have a really nice big ricasso down here. You can see the thickness of the spine, so it is quite thick, I'll give it that. And moving down to the crossguard, we have our hook quillen. Now, I've read in Kiesling's book that the hook quillens were removed after the First World War, and you do see these without hook quillens. However, I don't know if they are this bayonet or if they're one of the later versions for the cavalry carbine or engineer's carbine, or if they're something else completely different. They could very well just be these that were shaved down, having the quillens removed. Quillens were removed by many countries because they get in the way. They get tangled in equipment, they get tangled in foliage, and when you're fighting in the jungle, I can certainly see the issue with that. Then we have the muzzle ring sitting nearly flush with the handle, and we have our wooden grip panels, one each side. And you'll pretty much always find these with very dark coloured wood, and that's a result of absorbing a lot of oil and a lot of moisture. So Indonesia being a tropical country, there's going to be a lot of humidity, a lot of moisture is going to get in there, and there's also going to be a lot of oil introduced to the grips because you're going to be fighting off corrosion on your rifle and oiling it very heavily, so there's going to be a lot of oil getting in there as well. Now we just have our two really big rivets. Having a look at these ones here, there's another circle on the inside. So I'm wondering if these are like exterior bolts with a nut that's stuck through it and then ground off. I don't really know how it works, or riveted in. Moving down to the pommel, we have quite a uniquely shaped pommel. It's very reminiscent of the pattern 1888 that the British used. And the Dutch used these on all of their model 1895 bayonets, except for the cavalry carbines, which sat sideways. And I love the look of those. They're really, really cool. I'll get one as soon as one pops up down here, but you just don't see them very often. Then we have a groove in the top of the pommel to accommodate the underside of the barrel. And we've just got standard push button. As I say in every video, we've got a ramp lug on the inside. So as the bayonet lug passes in, it depresses the ramp, pushes it to the side, pushing it out, and then as it passes, it snaps into place. And to remove it, just press your button and slide off the front of the rifle. This one has a lot of corrosion on the interior of the mechanism. I've oiled it and I'm working it and slowly improving it. But that's just the case with these. They're, as I said, they're always in really bad condition. And the steel scabbards you get, just steel scabbards with a ball finale. I think they've got a horizontal frog stud, like a frog bar like the French have, but I'm not 100% certain. I haven't seen any great photos. If I find one after filming this, I'll chuck it in here. And that's really all there is to say about the construction. It's quite a nice bayonet, very elegant. Aesthetically, I think it's one of the best out there. I absolutely love the look of it. And finally, all there really is to say, other than that, is the markings. So we've got left ricasso, manufacturer marking. This one is OEWG, as the first two orders are. And if it says Hembrug, it's going to be the third order from 1915 or possibly 1918 as well. I don't know what they were. Then on the right side, we have a T underneath a crown. That's an inspection mark. And that's an inspection mark for K.A. Browning, who was a Dutch officer, I believe, a military officer. And he was posted to the factory where these were manufactured in OEWG, in Austria, at OEWG. And he was there between the 2nd of December 1895 to the 21st of February 1898. And he went back between, I think it was the 8th of December 1900 to the 9th of April 1901. So there's a couple of different inspection marks you can get. You can get the B under the crown, you can get a couple of different ones. And you can look online and figure out which inspector had that stamp and what date they were in the factory. And that might let you know what date your bayonet, or rifle for that matter, is. And just down here on the crossguard, we have a serial number. And the way these serial numbers work is you'll have 4 numbers followed by a letter. And each letter represents a batch of 10,000. So the first 10,000 will have 4 numbers A. Second 2,000, 4 numbers B. This one's got a C prefix. So we've got, see if we can read it off camera, 8400C. So that'd be 28,400. So this would be the first order, the first 36,000 ordered in 1896. And that'll line up with the inspector mark because he was there from 1895 until 1898. So it's in that bracket there. What other markings do we have? We have another couple of inspection markings. So where are they? Here we go. We've got another one down here on the pommel, just above my thumb on the right pommel. And then on the left pommel, we have a K within a circle. And that's a KNIL acceptance mark. So remember that K, or KNIL, is an abbreviation for the Royal Netherlands East Indies Army obviously starting with K when spoken in their language. So K in the circle is like an acceptance or property mark for the nil. And the only other marking you're going to come across is the KAR, as previously stated, on the pommel and on the scabbards. Now, when you do come across these, they sell for stupid money. I don't usually say what I pay for bayonets, but in this condition, without a scabbard, I paid 300 Australian dollars, and I reckon I did pretty well. I should also point out that originally these came with a very, very heavy protective blue on them. And through all the pitting and the damage and the corrosion, you can still make that out. Like, this bayonet has well and truly seen like so much abuse. I've cleaned this so many times, I've oiled it, and every week there's fresh corrosion popping up. So I think I'm just going to give it an absolute smashing, dry it down as best I can, and wax it up with Renaissance wax, and hopefully that will stop the corrosion, because I've cleaned it so many times. I've been working on the internal mechanism and it just comes straight back the next week. Anyway guys, that's all I have to say about these bayonets. If I've made any mistakes or I've left anything out, please feel free to comment below. I'd love to hear from you, and thanks for watching.